Welcome to Beyond the Mask. In this episode, we're talking with someone who's no stranger to bold moves and big transitions, Dr. Randy Moore. From the front lines of anesthesia care to the executive boardroom, Randy made the leap from the OR to the C-suite, taking on leadership roles that challenged him to think beyond individual patient care and into the realm of healthcare systems and strategy. But after years at the top, he made the decision to return to his clinical roots every once in a while. Today, we dive into what motivated that move, what he learned along the way, and how his time in leadership changed his perspective on patient care, provider well-being, and the future of our profession. This is a conversation about identity, impact, and coming full circle. Let's get started.
CRNA Financial Planning is a sponsor of Beyond the Mask podcast. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Plus, did you know listening to our podcast can earn you Class B credits? For details on how to submit, visit the CE credit section at beyondthemaskpodcast.com. Welcome to Beyond the Mask, innovation and opportunities for CRNAs and advanced practice nurses, with certified financial planner Jeremy Stanley and CRNA Sharon Pierce. Jeremy Stanley has worked with CRNAs for more than 23 years, and Sharon Pierce is a former president of the AANA and the NCANA. Join us as we leave the operating room and learn the latest in the CRNA and advanced practice nurse industries. Beyond the Mask starts in 10, 9, 8, 7.
Randy, welcome to the show. It's always good to have you on, buddy.
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Wow. We at least get you once a year at Congress, and now we're getting you twice a year. I kind of like it.
Oh, you're so lucky.
I know.
2 doses.
2 doses of Randy.
Yes.
He didn't have a choice in this one.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sure. His arm. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be back. Always.
Yeah. I read, he'll talk a little bit about this Substack stuff that he does now, and I'm subscribed, and he wrote an article called "I Left the OR for the C-Suite and Then Came Back." And I read it and I immediately picked up the phone and called him. I said, we've got to talk about this. So why don't you tell about the medium that you're using? So if other people want to follow you and read your writings, they can do so, Randy.
Sure. Yeah. So the good news is I'm not selling anything. So if you want to read the articles and you want to get I've been on a weekly clip and I seem to be able to keep it up. So weekly I publish an article, a thought piece. It's probably 85% anesthesia related and then 15% leadership strategy, maybe a little bit broader healthcare.
A little bit of humor in there, Randy. You
A little bit of humor. Yeah. It's definitely my voice. So those of you who know me know that I show up with a different perspective and maybe a little bit of an acerbic tongue sometimes when I talk and write. So the idea is, a weekly thought piece, anywhere from like kind of the macro, what's happening in the world of anesthesia, to maybe so like, hey, how do you as a early career CRNA or even anesthesiologist think about designing a career? And so I publish it through Substack, and I often cross-post it either on LinkedIn or the usual suspects in terms of the CRNA Facebook pages. So, and if you're interested, feel free to Google Randy Moore Substack, and I think you'll probably be able to find it after a little bit of searching. And again, like I said, I'm not selling anything, just putting some thoughts out into the world.
I love the perspective, Randy. I read the one I guess you did this week about anesthesia company, basically survival and private equity and the changes going on. And whereas they got into it for the short term, and now this has turned into a long-term game, and that's typically not private equity's mantra. Very interesting because, sometimes I read it and I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Sometimes I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
It's more anesthesia related. I'm like, well, I had no idea. But you kind of go all over the place with it, which is something I like. So I think you're doing a good job with it. So,
well, thank you so much. And thanks for reading.
All right, Randy, for some of our listeners who might not know you, I'm not sure, unless they graduated in the last couple of years, who that might be, but just give kind of a brief background for you and where you're at now and what you're up to these days.
Sure, I'll try to give you the elevator version. So let's see if I can sneak this in 20 seconds or 30 seconds. So I'm a CRNA, and I have in the past have had leadership roles within hospitals and health systems. I was on the board of directors of the AANA, and I'll spare everybody the details in terms of how I went from the board to being CEO, but I was CEO of the organization for about 4 years. Enjoyed that, but then decided I wanted a different career challenge, professional challenge, and then I joined NorthStar Anesthesia as the Chief Anesthetist Officer. And I've been in that role for 4 years, and back in January of this year, my role evolved even more at NorthStar. So now I'm the Executive Vice President of Clinical Strategy, which cuts across the entire clinical platform. So I spend a lot of my time thinking 3 years into the future, which is probably my sweet spot in terms of when I bring value to conversations. But also, clinical ops is putting out fires and addressing opportunities and challenges as they come in. And I'm also, I'm sure, I know we're going to unpack this a little bit, a practicing clinician once again, which was a bit of a plot twist for many people, but felt like the right move for me.
Let's unpack that a little bit, Randy, because you have been, you were out of clinical, and, you're in the C-suite, and you're a suit guy, and your hair got a little more gray there, a little bit. And now you've kind of gone full circle. Let's unpack that a little bit.
I think for me, when I look back to when I walked away from clinical practice, it was one of those things, like we've all met people who, whether they're anesthesiologists or CRNAs, who are like, I'm getting out of clinical. That was really never my orientation. So I left, I was 100% clinical. And then as my leadership roles changed and evolved, I took on more scope, both inside the hospital and outside the hospital. That ratio started to shift from being 100% clinical to maybe 50% clinical. And by the time I left, I was honestly 85% leadership, 15% clinical. And then when I was offered the role of CEO, I approached that with some flawed assumptions. And the biggest flawed assumption was that like the clinical part of my career was now over forever. And, I look back and I roll my eyes about how naive that was, because I definitely could have carved something out. I could have negotiated something with the board. I'm sure there would have been a little bit of back and forth, but I would have won that discussion. I could have continued my clinical practice, but I didn't. So I was in that role for 4 years. And when I went back to NorthStar, I had the opportunity to go back in the hospital. So we would visit hospitals where we have contracts, or maybe we'd visit hospitals where we're, negotiating contracts or doing startups. And I was spending time in the break rooms, and every once in a while I'd put my scrubs on and walk around the OR. And then I started to really think about it. It's like, I've been out of practice for 6.5 years. Is this really possible? Could I do it? So the hurdles here are real. So for those of us who are clinicians, we know the credentialing process is one of the most torturous things on the face of the earth. So when you walk away from clinical practice for 6.5 years, there are some questions you got to answer. And not with I'm board certified. I've always kept up my certifications and my state licensure, but you got to explain a departure like that. And it took some planning and some creative communication, but I was able to weasel my way back in. And so here I am, a year, almost to the day, a practicing clinician again after being away 6.5 years.
6.5 years is kind of a long time. You think about going on vacation, you come back and you feel like you're all thumbs. I mean, there's been some changes in 6 years. In your article, you talked about Sugamidex. It's the coolest drug. I hadn't had an opportunity to use it. I'd been out of a hospital system for 16 years. I did all office space, and we didn't have such fancy stuff as that. So I love Sugamidex too.
I kind of have a love affair with it now. So
yeah, I know, right? So tell us about your transition going back. I mean, and how did you tell the story? I haven't touched a patient in 6 years, and now I want to put somebody up again.
There was a lot of conversations, starting with my wife, who was like
the boss.
Yeah. So it was like, she's like, it's like, this is what I'm thinking. And she's like, is this when you have your midlife crisis? Is that what this is right now? It's like, well, I mean, it's, maybe it's either, I could get an earring or maybe a neck tattoo, but I've decided my midlife crisis, and it really isn't a midlife crisis, but what I want, and I explained it in detail multiple times. And she's like, I guess, I mean, if this is what you want to do. And then, I have the next conversations with my boss at NorthStar, who's the CEO of the organization that you've both met, Adam Spiegel. And he had similar, what's this about now?
Are you okay?
What's happening? What is the problem you're trying to solve here? And so, I talked him through it, why, there were personal and professional reasons why I wanted to be a clinician again, a practicing clinician rather. And I talked him through it, and he's like, well, okay. So I don't love the idea, but if you think it's the right thing to do, that's fine. And so then the conversations turn to like, what would be my point of entry? And then how can I prepare myself? So, obviously the most important thing is like, you don't want to put patients at risk with someone who's been out of the clinical environment for 6 years. So, we then navigated through that. So having conversations with some very confused CRNAs, chief CRNAs, like, wait, why? And the same question, like, wait, why are you doing this? And why have you picked my home site here to do this? And so I'm the chief anesthetist officer of the company. So it's, unsurprisingly, like, it's like people aren't like always excited when I walk through the door. I'm not a secret shopper here. This is like, I'm here. Like when I'm here, I don't want you to think about me necessarily in the context of my role at NorthStar. I want you to think of me as a fellow CRNA or a fellow anesthesia clinician. And I'm here with no ego. I want you to tell me what I need to be working on and where my skills have atrophied and how I can develop those skills over time. And so there was a lot of conversation about, no ego. I'm not here to mess with anything. I just want to learn and grow. And I want you to give me critical feedback about where I need to focus. And we did that. And it's worked really well.
Yeah, Randy, you mentioned midlife crisis, and I was just thinking, that's not a bad midlife criris. I mean, you could have showed up at a Coldplay concert, resources director.
Oh, snap.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on from that one because that's gone everywhere in the last week or so. But I imagine, Randy, from your viewpoint, I mean, it had to be somewhat stressful. One, you're walking in as kind of these people's boss, walking into their facility. They don't exactly understand why you're there. Your skills are a little bit rusty, so you're kind of looking at it. I mean, that had to be somewhat trying on everybody's part.
I mean, I was a nervous wreck the first, yeah. And I still, even now, because I don't want to overstate my clinical contributions to the sites I work at, but, I'm doing probably on average 4 days a month. So there's still a little bit like the night before, there's butterflies. I think about, okay, and I'm looking at the cases, and I'm thinking about the anesthetic plans and what can go wrong. In some ways, I show up early and maybe overly prepared like an SRNA.
You're doing your care plan the night before.
I'm definitely thinking it through.
Got Morgan and McHale out,
I did my last care plan in my last clinical rotation of anesthesia school. I won't be doing that again, but I am pretty diligent.
Yeah.
And so I think about things, and I think about, surgeries that I've done anesthesia for hundreds of times. I'll revisit it and say, okay, and think about, okay, what if I have my A, B, C, D plan in my head, like all good CRNAs. And so there is still some butterflies every time when I walk in. And certainly that first, call it 4 or 5 months, it was pretty intense, discomfort. But my experience is, and I'm old enough and mature enough to know that discomfort is usually a pretty good signal that you're doing something that's important and will result in growth. So I was okay with the discomfort. I certainly probably created some discomfort with the people who were proctoring me because, just because of my role within NorthStar. And I think I showed up low ego but you don't know how people perceive things. So, I mean, I did have a conversation probably, I don't know, 3-4 weeks into this where an anesthesiologist and I were talking about a case, and she stopped and she said, "Can I ask you a question?" I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Why in the hell are you here?" Yeah, by then I'd had my talking points pretty finely tuned, and I was appreciative that she asked me the questions. Like, no, and I told her, it's like, this is about me being a clinician and returning to my roots and how much I enjoy taking care of patients and yada, yada, yada. And I think by the end of the day, she has lost her skepticism, and she was really great to work with.
What surprised you the most?
I think this is going to sound bad because I'm definitely not spiking the football and saying that I was the clinician. I'm now the clinician I was before I left. I was very good with regional anesthesia before I left clinical practice. I was very facile doing labor epidurals and the like, and I still have a lot of growth in that area. But I think I was surprised with how little things have changed. So beyond Epic, which was around before I left, I just wasn't exposed to it. And I also have a love affair with Epic and Sugamidex in fancy new blocks that were either not in existence when I left clinical practice or not really being used widely. The art and science of clinical anesthesia remains largely unchanged from when I left. And so the muscle memory and that was really surprising to me. Like I remember the first few cases, like, oh, this is like, it's trite to say, but it is like riding a bicycle. So a lot of the clinical decision making I was making, I hadn't thought about those things for years, but it was coming back very quickly. So I was surprised by how little my skills atrophied, where the hard part was not necessarily the clinical skills. It was the clinical decision making. And where I think, and this is, for folks who have stepped away from clinical practice or are thinking about it, where I think we can get ourselves in trouble is in the operating room, you have to be decisive. And so if you're in a situation, and I've had these situations where I need to make a decisive decision here, I need to take a decisive course of action. That was, for me, the most important thing to rediscover. And some of the moments I've had that have been challenging, I look back, in the last year, I was like, I should have been more decisive. I should have, patients all had good outcomes, but that's the thing is having confidence in your clinical decision-making is the thing that comes back last. The clinical skills, the knowledge, those come back very quickly. And in most cases, in a large percentage of the case of those things, either whether it's your knowledge or your psychomotor skills, they really didn't go away. And it doesn't take long to bring them back. But the clinical decision-making is probably the hardest part. And that you have to build confidence or rebuild confidence.
Are you a resident or CRNA looking to transition into independent practice? Introducing the 1099 CRNA Institute, taught by Beyond the Mask host Jeremy Stanley and Sharon Pierce. This comprehensive educational series provides detailed guidance on business structure, legal and tax implications, and financial management, tailored specifically for 1099 CRNAs. Enroll now and earn valuable continuing education credits as you chart a new course in your rewarding career. Visit aana.com/1099 to learn more.
Yeah, I think anytime doubt, which is probably what it was, should I do this? Should I do that? Kind of an analysis paralysis process. Doubt enters, and doubt equals no definitive decision. And, but if you've done this every day for 15, 20, 30 years, and you've made those decisions like that in that environment, it definitely seems that it would come a whole lot easier.
When you think about the compare and contrast, and this is also, I've trained my mind to be more patient as an executive. So to think longer term, where you want to be decisive as an executive, but I have weeks to figure something out. And if it doesn't work out, it almost is always a two-way door decision. I can fix those mistakes.
Not a life or death, right?
Yeah, it's not life or death. So you don't see the consequences of your bad decision sometimes for months after you've made a bad decision as a
good and bad, right, Randy?
Yeah, as an executive. In the operating room now, we're talking seconds, minutes max, right? So if I've made a bad decision, you're going to see those consequences very quickly. And just like being an executive in the operating room, a bad decision is better than no decision. So because if you make a wrong decision, at least you can figure out you've made a wrong decision, and you can quickly address that. So indecision is very dangerous, especially if you're thinking about things like messing with a patient's airway or something like that. We notice, you see this clearly when there are airway misadventures. It's often related because of analysis paralysis or indecision. So in some ways that it's very different. In some ways, like there are some corollaries. So yeah, like, in the boardroom, in the executive suite, there's definitely stress, but in the operating room, it hits very differently.
So what are some other lessons that you learned? You talk about them in your article, and I loved each and every one of these. What you learned in this process?
I think as much as I talked a good game about, because there was a period of time, 6 years, where I was an anesthesia clinician, but I wasn't practicing. So I used to say things like, I know what it's like to do a C-section at 3:30 in the morning when you're so tired that, you can't see straight, which is true. But how, the farther you get away from that, the less
like
acute.
Childbirth.
Yeah, sure.
That's why women have children again. We get away from it and we forget how bad it was.
Right. And so I would say those things and I meant them, but you really don't know if, or at least you lose the appreciation for that as time goes on. So 6 years out, I was saying, I know what it's like to be a practicing clinician. And I was having difficulty looking myself in the mirror after saying that, because do you really? Do you really? Yeah, I intellectually understand, but I'm not in it. And production pressure is very real in anesthesia. And, the dealing with difficult surgeons and difficult staff. Like, I know I've done all of that. But if you're not in it and experiencing it in a very real way, then it becomes kind of an academic exercise. So if you think, so that's, just having an appreciation of me, the fact that I was largely paying lip service to some of the stuff because I was so far from it and so far removed in the org chart and so, distant from it in terms of time, it almost stopped being real to me. These were just kind of talking points that I was using. So I get it. And so I think when I'm in a situation where I'm making decisions that will impact literally thousands of people within the company, it's important for me to live with that and to be in the operating room and the break rooms as a clinician who puts scrubs on and takes care of patients and doesn't get a lunch break or whatever. I think you really do develop a clear perspective of what the consequences of my decisions are at an executive or strategic level and how that impacts people on the front line.
How do you think the team thought about you? Outside of the original, what in the world is he doing here?
I think there was understandable initial skepticism.
Sure.
First is like, are you going to be creating more work for me? A. B, what is your real motive? And then what I think I've observed over time is when I show up, and I think people pretty quickly are able to contextualize me as, this is Randy, he's here to help out today. And we appreciate that you're here and, let me know if you need anything. So I think now, I'm primarily or almost exclusively at one clinical site right now, at least. And so it's starting to feel like I'm a member of the team. And it took some time. It took them a while to kind of warm up to me, completely understandably. Now they see like, this is not a flash in the pan. I'm not there as a secret shopper. I give breaks, I give lunches. I will, jump on if I'll move my clinical day if it helps. So I do think that there is an awareness that I'm there for the right reasons. And so I've noticed certainly people have loosened up in the break room and are, treating me like a teammate versus, an executive from NorthStar, which is always what I wanted.
Randy, when you said that, this is Randy and I'm here to help, it reminded me of something you always say. I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help.
Yes.
That's exactly what popped in my head.
One of the 3 biggest lies.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I asked that question is, after being in this profession for many years, the bosses that I have had that I liked the most were the ones who could do the job and do the job right beside of me. One of my most favorite places I ever worked, the chief anesthetist still did 1 to 2 clinical days a week. And she would give herself the toughest rooms, toughest cases. And Linda San Giuliano, best person I ever worked for, best CRNA. But she was also fully committed to being one of the team. And so I suspect that's what the CRNAs there see you as. And if somebody will walk through the mud with you, you certainly respect them a whole lot more than somebody who's sitting there with their tie on and won't get their feet wet, right?
Yeah. I certainly hope so.
I imagine, Randy, you've got to prove that to that group that that's what you're really there for, which is the tough part, right? So as you look back on that 6-year period, Randy, would you have done anything differently? And do you think that it was a mistake for you to be out of clinical for that long?
I'm typically not someone who lives with regret. The way that I would answer that question is, if I had to do it over again when I've left clinical practice, when I became the CEO of the AANA, the answer would have been no. I would not have done that. Do I regret it? No. Because I see that now as a gift of perspective. And so being away from 6 years, from 6 years, I think I'm probably a lot more in love with clinical anesthesia right now than I was when I left 6 years ago, because I've rediscovered what I love so much.
Amadex.
Yeah. And that's super cool. And the Epic charting it blew my mind. There were periods of time where I was like, I don't know what to do right now because it's all being done for me. So that, notwithstanding those changes, I think by the time I left, I still loved anesthesia, but I love it in a different way now. Like I appreciate how incredibly important it is. And it's in terms of like how we take care of patients and the impact we have on patients' lives. And by the time I probably left 6.5 years ago, that was probably lost on me, that perspective. And being away for 6 years has helped me rediscover that. And that's what my takeaway, and I don't know, is for those, there are probably people who are listening to this right now who are thinking about, leaving clinical practice or maybe changing how much clinical they are. And I think I would encourage, if you're getting burnout, and it happens to most of us, during our careers is understanding why you're getting burned out and being creative about how you address that. And I think it's perfectly okay if you want to decrease your clinical time and go teach, or you want to start a company, or you just want to slow down. Whatever it takes in order to kind of get your head above water, I think is fine. My word of caution is if you think you're going to leave clinical practice forever, all you have to do is go to any of the CRNA Facebook pages and search that, and you're going to find a lot of people who did that and now are trying to figure out a way to end. And it's not easy. It's not easy. And so rather than departing 100%, maybe you slow down and maybe you work 2 days a month, or maybe you work a weekend, or maybe you work 1 day a week, whatever it is that you need to do to recalibrate yourself. That's perfectly fine, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave forever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's funny you say that. I mean, I see CRNAs who are at retirement age and think, I'm going to jump in both feet. I'm not going to recertify. I encourage everyone, even if they retire, to recertify one more time.
Yeah.
Just in case. I have seen people that have gotten there, thought they were done, and then realized later they weren't done and had no path back. And I've seen people who recertified and then ended up going to work, 1-2 days a week afterwards, a year, 18 months after they retired. So especially the people that, their life has been about anesthesia and work, and their friendships are there. It's something to consider. And, even if you're an educator, I think they need to be spending a certain amount of time clinically as well. So, Randy, I was going to say about you, I think it's interesting, I somewhat keep up with you, and, and now that you're writing these little articles, it's amazing to me to kind of have watched you for as long as I've known you, that now you've developed this macro view of anesthesia, and you have this grasp of the macro view that I don't think you had before. I'm not even sure you had it when you were at AANA. You had a view, but I've certainly seen it develop, and I respect the things you say, and, being a business person and somewhat understanding anesthesia and the business side of it. It's interesting to have seen you develop your mind and the way your thought patterns are about anesthesia and so forth. And I find it interesting. So I just wanted to let you know that I've noticed that in you.
Well, thank you.
The time that I've known. So
I appreciate that. And it's a lot. I think you're right. Like at the AANA, I had a good understanding of what was happening within healthcare and with the anesthesia and the anesthesia kind of business ecosystem. But I had an academic understanding. I didn't really. It's fairly superficial. But when you get into the business of anesthesia and you're accountable for, measurable outcomes, and you're able to think about, and you have access to the smartest people in the world at NorthStar, like the people that I work with are brilliant. So I'm on an A team of talent, and I've learned a ton from them. And so, and I have the privilege of being in a position where I can think strategically and can think from a macro perspective. And I've given all of these resources and autonomy to create the company 3 years into the future on the clinical side of the house, at least. That's amazing. And I think it's, it meets, kind of back to the thrust of this conversation has been about my clinical. I think the idea of me being macro and then micro at the same time has really actually influenced the way that I think about kind of the macro factors. So it's now, I think being a practicing clinician, and in some ways has really sharpened that for me. And it scratches, like I like taking care of patients. I like the challenges of clinical anesthesia. I'm now kind of in a team, work with a team that in a way that I haven't worked in a while. But I also have the opportunity to spend 80% of my time, 90% of my time doing, corporate strategy. It seems like a really nice fit for me.
So as we kind of wrap this up, what would you like to leave our listeners with?
I was asked this question recently in a webinar around what does the future of nursing anesthesia look like? And I was very bullish on that, obviously. My oldest daughter is going to college in the fall, and her plan is to be a CRNA. And if I had an issue with that, I would tell her that that's a bad move. But in fact, I've told her it's the smartest thing you could do. So I think while I'm overly bullish on the profession, if you ask me what are the things that keep me up at night, one of the things, and this is kind of related to Jeremy's statement, is I think we need more CRNAs in positions of influence. And so whether that is in the executive suite like me, or it is in a state legislature, or in a major policy setting regulatory body, or starting your own business, or, being a leader in academia. I really encourage the folks who are listening who have an interest in something other than clinical anesthesia to pursue that, because there is a lot of opportunity for individuals who have fire in their belly and who have, curiosity and ambition, and also have CRNA after their name. And I think some of those people sell themselves short. And I think there's tons of opportunity out there. So there's that. So I think, if you even have a inkling of an interest, I think you should pursue it. And the other part is kind of doubling down on my previous comment. For those of us who might be a little burned out by clinical anesthesia, know that that's normal, and that it happens. We all go through seasons, and that there are options for you, whether it's slowing down, whether it's getting into teaching, or whether it's developing a side hustle or something like that, that can help recalibrate and stabilize. And you don't necessarily have to leave clinical anesthesia. You just may need to do something else in order to fill your battery.
Well, Randy, I know we could sit here and talk to you forever, but it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and
great to be here.
Welcome you back.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Well, thank you for your kind words. It's always a pleasure to join both of you. It's an honor to spend some time with you. So forward to future conversations too.
Absolutely.
There'll be more.
All right. Well, Sharon,
It's a wrap.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Mask. If you enjoy the show and want to help us grow, the best way to support us is simple. Leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, share the show on social media, and tell your friends. Your word of mouth is what keeps us going strong. We're proud to consistently rank in the top 50 medical podcasts nationwide and to be #1 in the CRNA community. All thanks to listeners like you. Your support helps us stay there, and we couldn't do it without you. We'll see you on the next Beyond the Mask.
Hi, this is Jackie Rolls, President and founder of Our Hearts, Your Hands, a global support anesthesia community. We'd like to thank all of our prior donors and also say that we are accepting donations, welcome donations, to send a nurse anesthetist or even a nurse from a low-resource country to get further academic education or attend professional conferences or even equipment for some companies. Thank you so much for your support.